The most watched and longest running professional wrestling program in history. Sort of. Same name, different game, WWF War Zone. That's right, on the Stick-O-Maniacs. It's that time of year once again. The time of year when the radiant Joey Pink invades same name, different game. And this year, we're once again talking about WWF Raw. Sort of. So let's get started, you know it, with a little history. Listen, if you want an earful of history on Raw in general, check out last year's Wrestlemania special because I talked a lot about it then, and I ain't got time to repeat myself now. The important part here is that from its debut in January of 1993 until February 3rd, 1997, WWF Raw was a 1-hour show. But on that day, the World Wrestling Federation extended Raw to 2 hours. On March 10th of that same year, the show became known as Raw is War, and for ratings reasons, it was split into 2 separate back-to-back shows. The first hour was WWF Raw, and the second, you guessed it, WWF War Zone. Now, when you're talking about professional wrestling in 1998, well, I gotta tell you, whether you liked it or whether you didn't like it, I hope you learned to love it because it was the biggest thing going. Between the NWO on the WCW side and the Austin McMahon feud on the WWF side, the business was seeing heights that it had rarely, if ever, reached before, and certainly has not reached since. But on the video game front, things were a little different, especially on the WWF side. Things were a little lacking. The last video game to see the WWF license was a home-only follow-up to WWF Wrestlemania, the arcade game, called In Your House. The last straight-laced grappler with the WWF license was Rage in the Cage on the Sega CD, and the last one that anybody actually played was Raw. That was in 1994, and a lot had changed in the gaming landscape in those 4 years. The order of the day in 1998 was 3D. WCW had already released WCW vs. NWO World Tour on the Nintendo 64 and WCW vs. the World on the PlayStation, but the WWF had something in the works. Acclaim, holders of the WWF license since 1988, turned to their wrestling game stalwarts, the artists formerly known as Sculptured Software, by this time known as Iguana West, to bring a major change to the world of WWF video games. You know, as a younger Radiant One, I distinctly remember the hype surrounding this game. The hype was real, believe me. This game, for me, was a big deal because it was an intersection of professional wrestling and video games. My own personal peanut butter and chocolate, if you will. Now I poured over every magazine article I could get my hands on talking about this game. Developers talking about the facial scans from the wrestlers, talking about the motion capture, talking about reinventing the wrestling genre to make it more like a 3D fighting game in the vein of Virtua Fighter or Tekken. I was so stoked for this game that on July 24th, 1998, I went to my local Babbage's and I picked up the first game we're covering in this episode. WWF War Zone for the Sony PlayStation. And let me tell you something, I was not disappointed. The looks of this game blew away WCW vs. the World or any other wrestling game I could think of at the time. It had actual commentary from JR and Vince McMahon, spoken dialogue from the wrestlers, and while it wasn't exactly Tekken, it was a breath of fresh air compared to the 16-bit WWF games. No more mashing buttons to win grapples. You're given a punch button, a kick button, a grapple button, and a block button on the face of the controller. Different button combinations will do various moves both in grapples and out of them. It's not as user-friendly as AKI's grapplers, but it was still a far better game than button mashing endlessly only to get destroyed by computer players. The main mode is the WWF Challenge, in which you take on all the other wrestlers to win the title. The roster isn't huge, but it's respectable for the day. This game features The Undertaker, Kane, Mankind, The Rock, Farouk, Ken Shamrock, Owen Hart, the Headbangers Mosh and Thrasher, Triple H, the artist formerly known as Goldust, and a handful of wrestlers who were gone by the time the game came out. Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Ahmed Johnson, and the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith. Finally, you can unlock Cactus Jack and Dude Love, and each wrestler has a totally unique moveset and their unique finishing hold. Now, like I said, it's not as big of a roster as some other games, but for that time, it wasn't anything to sneeze at, and I'll tell you, all of these wrestlers recorded dialogue and promos specifically for this game, and if that's not good enough for you, there's a creator wrestler, though I will warn you, it's a bit rudimentary. It's downright primitive, and if you're used to current creator wrestlers, or even creator wrestler modes from Japanese games like the Fire Pro series, you're gonna be disappointed. I mean, you can't even assign individual moves. You gotta pick a full moveset. You can't do that. Nobody has the same moveset as the Radiant Joey Pink. There's not a ton of variety in match types, but there's your standard singles and tag matches, and then there's the weapons matches, as well as the 15-foot-high steel cage. The latter two come up when you're talking about the grudge match feature. Sometimes, someone you beat in an earlier match on your way to the title will want to have revenge in a knockdown, drag-out gimmick match with you, and you gotta show them that's a mistake. Now they're gonna tell you all about this with a recorded promo. Never mind that they sound like they were recorded in a warehouse with no sound dampening whatsoever. In 1998, this was awesome. After they throw down that challenge, you'll randomly meet them in either a weapons or a cage match. Now I probably don't need to tell you this, but just in case, if you haven't seen Ahmed Johnson's promos from this game, seek them out. Pure comedy gold. But I digress. Acclaim, being Acclaim, wanted to get their games out on as many platforms as possible. Unfortunately, by 1998, the Saturn was dead and buried in the United States. So the only other home console was the Nintendo 64. So guess what we got on August 11th, 1998? Did you guess? WWF War Zone on the Nintendo 64? I bet you did. Much has been made about the decision by Nintendo to go with cartridges on the N64 instead of a CD-based format. And to their credit, the N64 was home to a fair number of great games. but I'm not going to kayfabe ya. A game like War Zone illustrates exactly why people questioned this decision at the time. It plays fine, sure. In fact, it plays just like the PlayStation version. And hey, no load times. But all of the bells and whistles were dropped like a set of brass knuckles when the ref looks at you. The music is terrible. While the PS1 used real superstar themes, the N64 uses not just chiptunes, but pretty bad chiptunes. Pretty much all the superstar voices are removed, except for the pain sounds they make when they're in holds.
He takes him down!
And while I applaud Iguana West for getting as much of Vince and JR's commentary in here as they did, a ton of it is cut from the PlayStation version. To say nothing of the opening video being completely dropped, and oh, remember how I said that those promos for grudge matches were awesome in 1998? We'll take a look at how the N64 handles that.
I'm gonna enjoy this!
But it's not all bad. They at least made an attempt to make it up to N64 players, with 2 exclusive match types to this version. The first is the Royal Rumble. And in the Royal Rumble, it's every man for himself. No allies, only enemies. Isn't that right, Mean Gene?
When 30 of the greatest superstars of the World Wrestling Federation congregate in a competition where it's every man for himself, no allies, only enemies.
And Gauntlet is, well, a gauntlet match. Beat several opponents in a row without getting pinned. The problem with the Gauntlet match is that it's not terribly interesting. The problem with the Rumble match is that it's incredibly easy to get thrown out and to throw people out. You don't even have to be weakened or beat up at all. The command for Irish Whip turns into toss your opponent out when you're near the ropes, and that makes these matches go by pretty quickly. But hey, it's better than nothing. I mean, at least it's an attempt to compensate for the missing audio and video content. And those are the home console versions, and let me tell you something, Sticksters. I feel like these games get a bad rap. Nowadays, a lot of people hate on these games and talk about how terrible they are, and I'll be the first to admit, they've aged poorly. But I still find them considerably more playable than any of the 16-bit WWF games like Super Wrestlemania or Royal Rumble. And at the time, they were critically lauded as well. Jeff Gerstmann, now of Giant Bomb, then of GameSpot, said in his review, "This is the best wrestling package ever released and shouldn't be missed by anyone with even a passing interest in wrestling." He gave it an 8.6. The fact of the matter is this: Warzone was important for its time. But you know what's not important now, wasn't important then, and will never be important? The Game Boy version. The Game Boy version came out before the console versions, in June of 1998, believe it or not. And I'll tell you, it's good no one cared about the Game Boy at that time, seeing as Pokemon hadn't come to the West yet, and wouldn't until that autumn. Because this version of Warzone might have scared people off of the bigger, better home versions. This game is abysmal. I'm hard-pressed to think of words to describe just how unplayable this game is. Developed by Probe Entertainment, who did the excellent Mortal Kombat port on the Genesis, and Crawfish Interactive, a company that seems to have specialized in bad portable ports, this game is a disgrace. A jobber. Enhancement talent. A jabroni. A local competitor, you get it? The genre for this game could be called Roll Around on the Mat Simulator, cause let me tell you, you'll be doing a lot of that. The grapple system, if you can call it that, is deeply flawed. But the biggest problem, the number one problem with this game is that if you try putting some space between you and your opponent, you actually turn your back on him, leaving you open to a backdrop which, near as I can tell, cannot be countered. And then hey, it's back to rolling around on the floor. In addition to all of that, this game has a smaller roster, losing all the hidden wrestlers, as well as Bret Hart, and the Headbangers. Every wrestler has the exact same moveset with the sole exception of their finisher. The animations are bad, the character models look terrible. Just everything here is awful. I mean, WWF Superstars for the Game Boy was limited, sure, but it's at least playable. This game is complete trash. Now let me tell you something, Sticksters. I feel like all that trash my less radiant counterpart talked about Wolverine Adamantium Rage last month went out to the universe as some sort of challenge. Because War Zone for the Game Boy is absolutely the worst game Joey Pink has played for this show. Worse than NES Wrestlemania, worse than Superstars 2 on the Game Boy, worse even than Raw on the Game Gear. Well, anyways, it's that time of the show where we compare the graphics and the sound. So let's go ahead and do that while I try to wash the taste of this Game Boy version out of my mouth.
Definitely will call that a kill. Owen Hart is on Dream Street. Steve Austin has him at his mercy.
Austin 316 says I just whipped your
Pressure has a real opportunity here. Is struggling a little.
The N64 and PS1 games are evenly matched in the looks department, the slight edge going to the PS1 version simply due to the fact that the N64's hardware-based anti-aliasing doesn't do this game any favors on modern displays. I already talked about the N64's inferior sound due to the cartridge format, and now the Game Boy version looks and sounds bad. I mean, forget about comparing it to the console versions. It's bad by Game Boy standards.
There was never any question about this one.
And that, on the Stickamaniacs, makes it time to give the edge. And like I said, I think these games get a worse rap than they deserve. Well, at least the home console versions do. You know, they're really not that bad, and if you've got a lot of nostalgia for the Attitude Era, they literally will only cost you a couple of bucks each, so I say check them out. I would first recommend the PlayStation version. This one gets the edge from me. The video clips and the dialogue and the real music from that era, they just make it the better game for me. But hey, from a pure gameplay standpoint, it's identical to the N64 version, so if this is your system of choice, I say go ahead and check it out. And like I said, and like I can't say enough, the Game Boy version is a waste of plastic. Don't bother. Don't buy it. Don't look at it. Don't do anything with it. Don't even play it for a laugh, because it's not worth a laugh. It's garbage. Get it out of my ring. And that does it. And I would thank you for watching, but come on, I'm Joey Pink, which means the pleasure was all yours.
You want to do what I do for a living, son? Then step into the WWF War Zone. Go ahead, create your own wrestler. Just another victim for Stone Cold to take out. 4-player action, 4 more kicked. A piece of trash like you is gonna get the steel cage with me? All the moves in the world won't mean jack when you meet the Stone Cold Stunner. You wanna survive WWF War Zone? Stay away from me. And that's the bottom line, cause Stone Cold said so. Acclaim Sports.